The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Welcome back to the Titans of Nuclear podcast. Today we have an exciting and very experienced guest, JP Van Hasselt. JP is the CEO of Pacific Andean Nuclear Power Services, or PAM Power for short. JP, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Andy. Thank you very much for having me. Very excited to convey our business model to your long list of viewers. Thank you.
That's great. And typically before we get into the specifics, we'd like to get to know a little bit about you. And so maybe if we go all the way back, sort of your foundations, where did you grow up and how did you grow up?
Yes, I think we have to make a kind of a journey back to the past century. That's when I was born. And I was born and grew up in Lima, Peru. I studied law at the largest local university, then a Master of Law degree at George Washington University in the States. I was fortunate enough to hold an international position for Procter & Gamble Company. I was stationed initially in Cincinnati, but later in Caracas. And I think at this stage, point in time of my life, I had regional responsibility and started traveling all over South America. In fact, I know almost all the countries except Uruguay and the Guianas. But I know extensively all of the region, which will probably enter later into our conversation, why maybe it makes sense to where we are at in terms of nuclear energy.
Yeah. Any reason you stayed out of Uruguay, or?
Maybe I'll go there in the near future. I hope so. Another highlight of my life has been working in tech. I worked as a legal director for a mobile company, a telecom, and this allowed me to gain a lot of insight of what technology is, where it was. And we've assembled a long list of co-workers, and we stand together in this new venture. All of us very curious on what technology is, and a lot of synergy, a lot of teamwork. And I think this is what's going to be the success to what we want PAM Power to be.
That's great. Maybe zooming back to your undergrad and graduate degrees, curious as to what brought you into the law side of things.
Well, that's that brings me some sweet and bitter memories. I think I've been very geared towards what injustice is. I've seen injustice very close in my surroundings, and I think I wanted to do something about it, do something probably to give my piece of advice on making a better world. I collaborate with the Peruvian government a lot. Actually, I'm a member of the advisory council of the competition authority in Peru. And that's ad honorem. So I do a lot of pro bono work whenever possible. So I think I'm geared towards that. That's what made me become a lawyer, perhaps.
Yeah,
And besides, I'm not that good at math.
I think we share some of that in common. I started my career in Ethiopia with a general
Wow.
bent towards wanting to improve systems and do good for the world. So sounds like there's some commonality there. So outside of that, I mean, I think your background is super interesting. You obviously have your hand in a lot of pots. I heard so P&G, so consumer goods, mining, construction, et cetera, back there. What led you to the next step and to enter the nuclear industry?
Actually, from our group of techies back from the telecom industry, we have our quasi-scientist wizard who's very curious on what's going on in the world, and he brought us to validate this idea on what the Northern Hemisphere was doing in terms of energy, the environmental concerns, and also what was going on in Europe because of the war with Russia and the evasive measures that were taking place by the European countries that were affected by the gas shortage. And the SMR came up as one of the solutions that the civilization is looking towards as a solution in this crisis. So our quasi-scientists brought this idea. We started studying about it. This was last year. Mm-hmm. We even went to validate this with local authorities in neighboring countries. I went to the, interesting enough, I visited the National Atomic Energy Institute of Peru, mm-hmm. and they handle a risk assessment of where energy is going to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And climate warming is a true fact. Mm-hmm. And gas production also is going to come at a halt because of depletion of resources in the 20 or 25 year term. Mm-hmm. This is something that probably is, certainly is going on in the neighboring countries. I read the news yesterday also that Bolivia has depleted its gas resources. Colombia, on the other hand, has a 65% grid coming from hydroelectric resources. And climate change and global warming is taking a strong blow to the generation of energy through hydroelectrics. Probably in 20, 25 years, we're going to have a crisis. And what I know is that currently, in dry seasons, these hydroelectric generators have to be powered by fossil fuels. So imagine the contradiction on that. What's going on with the world? We think it's time to come up with a solution. And we're very positive that SMR technology is going to have a very strong hand in what we will see in the near future.
Yeah. And maybe if you could, based on all that research and your discussions with the National Atomic Agency, how did you, get into PAM Power specifically? What's the mission, and how many employees do you have? What's the goal in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yes, we have for example, we need to change public opinion. Mm-hmm. Throughout the Americas, 3 countries allowed atomic energy, but only used by the state. And we want to change the first, the public perception of what atomic energy is, and second, we want to allow that the governments issue laws which favor civilian use of atomic energy, as long as it's in a safe configuration, which probably would be SMRs or even microreactors, in whichever technology we're seeing that is coming across. We have reviewed facts from the International Institute of Atomic Energy, and there are approximately 70 technologies which classify as SMR. We want to have a comprehensive law in place in each of our neighboring countries, which will allow SMRs. And what we want is to source from Lima the demand that in the future there may be throughout the Americas. We have taken one step already by obtaining a draft bill for exploitation of atomic energy by civilians. Here in Peru, we'll be filing it to Congress probably in the first days of August. And we're going to replicate all of these steps country by country, which will require, of course, a lot of investment. And that is the way that we are going to handle it via, let's say, a legal and corporate affairs approach. Because we believe in the technology, we think that's what needs to be done throughout our countries. South America, for example, hosts the largest Amazon rainforest, the Amazon, and we need to do something about it. And also, we are thinking that it cannot be that we're within this blue sphere. What's the point on having the Northern Hemisphere producing exclusively SMR, let's say, emissions-free environment when the Southern Hemisphere is still suffering? The atmosphere moves around, and we want to, all of us, comply with zero emissions. So our task is bringing this safe technology to the Southern Hemisphere, to South America, and allow a better environment for all of us throughout the world.
Yeah, I have some experience in Ethiopia, a lesser developed country, but similarly reliant on, hydro and other forms of traditional energy. I'm interested from Peru and maybe Latin America's perspective, like, what is maybe the differences, the core differences that you see between sort of the Southern Hemisphere and, the growing energy demand coming from that area of the world versus, what we in the Northern Hemisphere have?
Well, interestingly enough, I saw this documentary by Oliver Stone, Nuclear Now, which has been really an eye-opener. It's really a wonderful instrument for, let's say, to spread the gospel on what nuclear will do to the world. It's been really, really a fantastic piece of art, this documentary. Even though we believed in the technology, after seeing this film, we thought, wow, I mean, we're on the right track. And I'm citing this documentary because I recall a scene where Oliver Stone is interviewing Ashley Finnan, PhD from the National Reactor Innovation Center. And she indicates that while in the Northern Hemisphere in the United States, the demand will stay kind of stable because it's covered, the real opportunities will come from all over the world, i.e., Southern Hemisphere, where for example, we see that there is demand that needs to be satisfied. We see it in agriculture, we see it in mining, many projects that are looking for energy, for various forms of energy to go ahead with their projects, but there's a demand that needs to be covered. And we want to be there to cover it and allow our region to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you mentioned this a little bit, but in South America, a large percentage of the power comes from hydroelectricity. I think that there's some other, coal and natural gas. You mentioned
Exactly.
dependencies on natural gas. What maybe the flip side, do you know much about, or could you share about the landscape of consumption? I mean, it sounds like SMRs could be a good fit, in particular for some of those off-grid, if there's large mining consumers, et cetera, that are maybe not tied to a national grid. But what does the landscape look like for power consumption?
Most South American countries are hugely large. Let's say Peru would fit in 1/3 of Western Europe, for example, covering Italy, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and so on. So the grid that you need to build is humongous. Is that a good adjective?
Yeah.
It's huge, extensive, and we see that generators cannot cover these extensions of land that much. Rather, with modular generators and technologies, we can offer these to villages, let's say to the city halls, to huge mining concerns. Most of the South American countries are mining producers, so there are the clients that could benefit from SMRs, and maybe they can spread this energy through what we call their area of influence, and use this modular technology to spread the energy throughout their own areas of influence, benefiting society as a whole. So probably, let's say, large cities can of course continue with their traditional grid, but the opportunity for SMR modulars technology would be like locating them like at very far extensions of land where you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. I think it's easy to get caught up in in the Western world, looking at how grids were built out in the early 1900s and seeing this big centralized system. But then, like you said, when you have to cross mass, amounts of land, and forget that land has mountains and rivers, the Amazon River running through it, it's an entirely different feat. So it certainly makes sense more from a microgrid perspective than otherwise. So
we have, for example, just met with some key investors from Colombia. We're trying again to spread throughout the geographies, the territories, what we are doing, and they have become very interested in the technology and what we are doing. And 2 universities are going to host us in a Zoom meeting to let them know what we are doing and what this could do for their country. So we're very happy that, let's say, our business model is carrying on.
That's great. Can you speak a little bit about, more broadly, how you see, the different countries, personalities, politics of the countries in Latin America cooperating towards a common goal around nuclear development?
Well, I think this probably is like a global issue. So we perceive that there will be a lot of cooperation among the countries. This is not a military issue, or let's say, I mean, this goes to the core of society, to the core of advancement of industry or of any economic activity in the country. So I think that there is going to be, from a public perspective point of view, probably there will be a negative image initially, like collectively, because I remember Fukushima, I remember 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and we have to let people know that these accidents were a product of different issues. 3 Mile came from a tsunami. I'm sorry, Fukushima came from a tsunami. 3 Mile it was a handling error, but it got magnified by the China syndrome film. We've read about that. And Chernobyl is actually, yes, a human error issue that happened 20 or so or more years ago. We're letting everybody know that this technology, adequately handled, does not produce any leaks, does not produce any accident. And I think we have to have a concerted effort, probably build a network of contacts within each city, major city in each of our neighboring countries to help us disseminate the word among all of us and have a united front.
Yeah, that speaks very well with me. You mentioned earlier, discussion, and part of the mission of PAM Power is, change. You mentioned earlier, change of perceptions. You mentioned that, some of what's happening in Ukraine, and other geopolitical, and for other geopolitical reasons, there is sort of this push in Peru and otherwise for energy security. Can you speak maybe to that to some extent, but also like what have been, in your effort to win over stakeholders to the nuclear production of energy, what have been sort of the best arguments, the best bullet points to bring folks from maybe undecided over to pro, or maybe from against over to undecided?
Actually, I think that maybe now information travels so fast. People are seeing now what is going on. The magnification, not the magnification, but actually the high visibility that the Ukraine situation has right now throughout the world, and what it has meant in terms of the energy resources from Russia to Europe, have people interested. Oh, what is going to be the alternative? And they are reading what Great Britain is doing, Canada, the United States, and Germany, and so on. For example, from our corner of the world, we can believe, and I hope I don't get a visa revoked or something, that Germany has completely pulled out of the atomic energy, we know, due to the Green Party, but probably for some other time. I think that juncture is completely harmful for them as a society. On the other hand, look at France. 72% of their grid comes from nuclear, which is fantastic. And we hope we bring our region in towards the direction that France is taking, which is, I think, the safest in terms of environment and national security as well.
And what are some of the maybe some of the opponents who don't have too much experience with nuclear? Is there a broader push for renewable deployment or solar, wind, et cetera? What does the landscape look like for renewables in Latin America?
Well, the trend is kind of global. It stays like at around solar and wind. It stays at around 12%. They have grown. I think they have done a good lobby internationally, and laws have come into place with incentives for them.
Yeah.
And they are in fact growing, and we have no problem about that, because we know that all of these technologies need to complement themselves, and we want to complement wherever renewables cannot provide. Let's say in probably in night conditions, foggy conditions, and any other environment where renewables cannot deliver. We'll be there to provide, let's say, a backup. So we have no problem in having those technologies around. I think there's a big market. There's an unsatisfied demand throughout South America.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. All of the above approach, because certainly all forms of energy complement each other. So maybe zooming in a little bit on Peru, you mentioned earlier the start, at least, of a definition for a regulatory process. And I would guess that, your legal background can have particular oomph or power in setting up a regulatory regime. Can you talk a little bit more about how that process has gone, and what hopes you have for the future of smoothing, whether it be the site licensing process or the permitting and approvals process? How does that look like in Peru?
Well, who knew, Andy, that my law career would pay off someday? I mean, had I known that I would be working in nuclear issues now, I mean, unbelievable. But well, of course, when our quasi scientist Pedro brought this idea to us, I immediately researched a regulatory framework and determined that what needed to be done. And I started studying on what needed to be done, and made an action plan about it. And we secured the consulting services of a U.S. law firm who's an expert, who are an expert on this matter. And we have jointly drafted our bill proposal. So initially, we are going to seek the feedback of the engineering grade of professionals, engineering schools. There's nuclear energy being taught at some of the engineering schools in the country, and from there we'll take it to Congress and see what will be the reaction at Congress, because of course there'll be opposing forces. The conservative generators of energy will probably try to somehow neutralize whichever efforts. This is the source of democracy at work. So we have no problem with it.
And do you have any timelines that you're targeting in terms of how long the process should take, or?
Well, we think we're synchronized in what the industry will deliver. We attended, three of us attended the SMR Reuters conference early this year in Atlanta. And we were really surprised. It was such a learning experience, getting to know all these huge titans as well on what they are doing. We're just dwarfs over here. And we see that production will probably start in 2025, 26. Commercially available products will be there in the market. And I think we are kind of running in the same direction, maybe synchronizing what we expect it will be a law for SMRs, and having commercially built products here in the market. I think we're there on the same time frame. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I think Argentina has some operating nuclear plants.
Yes,
Brazil has some as well. What has been,
Mexico.
have you guys been consulting with them in terms of
Yes,
licensing and the process development?
yes. We have very good contact with the largest nuclear reactor company, INVAP. They're in Bariloche, Argentina. Excellent relations with them. And I think we're going to do something together. We have talked, and I think they're going to tailor make something for our South American market, and we'll be very eager to help them penetrate the market with their product.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And are they of a similar mind around sizing? Are they going after, large, gigawatt reactors? Are they also looking at the SMR route?
They're experts on their mega gigawatt reactors.
Yeah.
The famous Karens they have. I think it's about to be completed soon. They have built reactors even here in Peru for national use
Mm-hmm.
and in some other countries. But the last time we spoke, they told us, and I think it's confidential, that they're developing something that is inherently for our region.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's great to hear. Maybe sort of rounding out the last, 10, 15 minutes, shifting gears towards, the future. So we talked a little bit about this, throughout the landscape side of the conversation, but what do you hope for? Like, what are the big milestones that you'd like to see Peru or South America writ large make in the next, 5-10 years?
We see ourselves working to change the grid, to bring atomic energy in the same way as it is used in Europe, in that same trend, and that it be accepted. One thing I picked at this SMR conference is that, for example, for all of us here in South America, it may be very easy to import products, let's say a portfolio of finished products, SMRs, maybe from Japan, from Canada, from France itself, maybe even from Great Britain. We've spoke with representatives from top companies from all of these countries. But there is one issue, and probably I think this is what was the suggestion of having me here live to speak about it, is about the U.S. exports control,
Mm-hmm.
which I totally understand, of course, but I would like to suggest that the industry as a whole needs to work, because probably national security is in a balancing interest versus commercial interest of the private sector. I think it'll be very difficult for us, and as much as we like the US technology, for example, NuScale, which has already obtained certification from the Atomic Energy Agency, that would be the easiest reactor to bring along with a US certification. No national atomic energy probably would object to having a duly certified nuclear reactor. But again, we have those exports, US exports control, that
Yep.
Are hinder the imports of this product, of products from your country, because again, I understand there are national security concerns. But maybe, South America as a whole is probably should be considered as friendly nations, as a friendly region towards the US. So I think that the industry would need to work out some sort of a path for us to be able to obtain that technology. Interesting thing, I'm sorry, is that I, while reviewing what's going on around the world, entered the U.S. Embassy webpage in Romania, and SMRs are offered in the webpage of the U.S. Embassy. Why can't one South American country who's as friendly and has no adversary issues with South America grasp whatever collaboration is going on there with the State Department, the Commerce Department, the Energy Department, and probably deploy those products here in the region? That would make U.S. products probably very interesting, available, and desirable to all the nations around the region. So that's something I wanted to make a point of. Maybe if I can leave a message for all your viewers, it would be that as a whole, from the Northern Hemisphere, from the U.S., yourselves, and us from here, we could jointly work on devising some sort of collaboration among nations, so that there would be some sort of fast track for importing U.S. products of this technology here into our region.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and you see this, other areas in nuclear as well, whereas, there may have been a safety case designed around specific, size or type of technology, and then when you try and scale that down to an SMR, it doesn't quite fit. So maybe some of the protections that exist for highly enriched uranium and the reactors that might process them, maybe they don't apply as specifically to low enriched uranium and particular SMRs that use low enriched uranium. So I think it's a great point, and something that we hope for some progress and a pathway on as well. So
I mean, it's been done in Romania. Maybe we need to find out what has happened there. I hope we can replicate the model.
Are there any new technologies? You mentioned NuScale, but anything on the horizon that you're particularly interested outside of just the sizing of an SMR?
We're looking into microreactors, and we're also very interested with a technology that Last Energy is also going to offer. Commercially wise, I think it'll be a hit in this region. And so far, I think that's what about it that we are looking for. But as we gathered when we went to the Congress in Atlanta, they told us, listen, this thing, the technology in energy is going to change fast. So don't get hooked on anything, because tomorrow there might be an improvement. So that's a lesson to be learned for us.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you already mentioned one of these, but I'm interested in maybe your analysis of like the top three things. Like if you could control the government, multiple governments in Latin America, what are the or anywhere in the world really, because you already mentioned export controls, like what are the three things that you would change that you think could accelerate the transition the most?
Well, the exports control, some fast track method, lower tariffs, incentives on new technologies that are zero emissions and environmentally safe, like SMR. And I think a number of incentives for this technology to replace old energy producing generators.
Yeah.
I think that's what I would think of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I
So,
mean, being around the Amazon, I think there should be some sort of regional authority that would somehow indicate, listen, we need to preserve the rainforest. Let's bring out some method or some technology that will be only environmentally friendly, because we cannot afford to lose the Amazon rainforest.
yeah.
I think maybe some United Nations agency could take care of that.
That's great. So in closing, any final message you want to leave for our listeners?
Well, we are here in our corner of the world, South America. We're in the same continent, believe it or not, but we're so far away in terms of culture and distance as well. But we are trying to have South America grow economically and on terms of living by bringing a first world technology to our region. I think that allowing to have energy available to people that have an unsatisfied demand is what will help our markets and our economies grow. So I really appreciate this time, Andy, that you have given us.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your time today and sharing your story and your wisdom for the path forward. So thanks for coming on today, and look forward to connecting in the near future.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.